I'll be reading Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 20. Habakkuk chapter 2, verse 20. The Lord is in his holy temple. Let all the earth be silent before him.
We're going to talk about that happened in karaoke too over the retreat weekend. I just have a problem with Mike. And it's funny because that was actually the opening I had. We're talking about crisis this morning, not COVID. I'm done talking about COVID. I'm done hearing about COVID. I'm sure I'm not the only one here that's done hearing about COVID, talking about COVID. But I do want to talk about crisis because, believe it or not, even though there's this COVID outbreak, this pandemic going on, people are still going through crisis in their own personal lives, their own individual lives. They have other things going on that are big deals other than the COVID pandemic. So we're going to talk about crisis and dealing with crisis in your own life, whatever that might be. And I know that might sound very general because we're not going to narrow it down onto just one topic, but we are going to talk about some things and talk about some principles that God has to say for us in His Word that will help us in dealing with our own personal crisis that we're going through in our life. The amount of crisis that there are, the different categories can seem overwhelming. When you just go through your head and think about the different kinds that are in this world, you have a natural crisis, which is tornadoes, earthquakes, hurricanes that we're getting backsplash from. You have all these natural crises that can happen, and really, there's no helping that. It's going to happen, even though the weathermen in Alabama have no idea what they're talking about whatsoever. I don't even watch the Weather Channel anymore because whatever they say, it's just a toss-up. It's just like, well, it could rain, or there could be a tornado, which we just don't know. And I've never heard so many tornado sirens in my entire life. I lived in Colorado. I heard maybe 4. And out here, I remember last year, I freaked out because it seemed like there was this month where every other week there was a tornado siren going off and people are rushing for these shelters and stuff, and not one tornado happened where we were. But there's all different kinds of crisis. You have that natural crisis, then you have the technological crisis that just happened slightly when I got up here, and another reason why I don't like to use PowerPoint very often is because when that crisis hits, it can throw everything off. And I know Ed struggled a little bit with that over the retreat, is when it doesn't work, it's so frustrating. And if you're not good with technology like me, it is a real crisis, and it turns into one very quickly. It's like God was trying to prep me for this lesson as we got ready, got in the car, turned the car on, about to back out of the driveway, and all of a sudden, the 4Runner starts shaking. The engine starts shaking, the whole car starts shaking and rumbling, and I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. We're so early. We're getting in, we're going to make it there early, and now the car is falling apart right before our eyes. And so I popped the hood and pretended I knew what I was doing, like Kenny, underneath the hood, and I just kind of tinkered around, gave the look to make my wife think that I knew and I understood exactly what was going on beneath the hood, and I kind of put my arm on the front, and I squinted my eyes and looked at it, and I thought, well, it's good enough to make it to church, and it did, so I know maybe something. But we made it here, and I have no idea if we're going to make it back or not. But crises can come, and they can come out of nowhere, and they can be in any of these different categories. And of course, there's a health crisis. If you look at our prayer list, it seems like maybe every Sunday, every Wednesday, every time we get together, the list just gets longer and longer and longer. And everybody has all these different health problems and all of these different things that you could classify as a crisis because it affects their everyday life. It's something that some people here are living with on a day-to-day basis. There are more crises out there than just the COVID pandemic, but I want to talk about the most important crisis that if we face as Christians is not just damaging to us, but also damaging to the world, and that, of course, is an identity crisis. I don't know how many of you here that have graduated high school or gotten out of college would want to go back to high school or go back through college. I see so many people shaking their heads right now. Me neither. Because there is this identity crisis that I think a lot of people go through when they're in school or they're in college, and they're trying to figure out exactly who they are. They're trying to figure out, okay, what kind of clothing do I wear? Like, is that going to change who I am as a person? Or they think, what job am I going to have? What group do I fit in with? Am I a nerd? Am I a geek? Am I a jock? We have all of these different categories and all these different labels, and if you're homeschooled, the whole thing is just really confusing because you have no idea what anybody else is doing outside of your house. But we go through crisis growing up. But the identity crisis as a Christian can be very damaging to both you and your own spiritual life and also to the world. When you think about those great men of faith in the Bible that forgot who they were even for a moment, forgot whose they were for a moment, and the damage that it caused to not only them but also to the people that they were with. The people in my mind that come to my mind are people like Moses. He forgot who he was for a second, and he let that human feeling of anger and angry outburst, and he strikes the rock, and he forgot who he was. In that moment, he forgot whose he was. He's the leader of God's people. He's the one that God chose to lead his people, to set the example. The bar for Moses was a lot higher, it seemed, than everybody else, but he forgot who he was, and in a moment, he was not able to see the promised land. He died outside the promised land. And if you think about that, if you've read from Genesis all the way through and followed the Israelites and their exodus out of Egypt, and you followed their journey through the wilderness, and they go through some crazy stuff. There are fiery serpents involved. There are moments when the ground actually opens up and swallows up a bunch of them. There are trials and tribulations throughout their entire journey. And Moses is the guy leading them through year after year after year. And he doesn't even get to see the place. He doesn't even get to live in that place, the land of promise they'd been looking for over 40 years. He forgot who he was, and he forgot whose he was. You think about David, who's still known as the man after God's own heart, but if you read about the life of David, his life before Bathsheba and then his life after Bathsheba, there is this stark contrast in his life and how things are going. He forgot who he was. He forgot whose he was. And in that very human feeling of lust, he gives into it, and then he commits murder, and then he lies, and then his whole kingdom after that. I mean, when you see him at the end of his life and he's sitting on the throne, compared to how he used to be, he's weary, he's tired, and he's just an old bag of bones sitting on the throne, living in stress and regret from the decision that he made. He's still known as the man after God's own heart, but in that moment when he forgot who he was and whose he was, his life just seemed to crumble. And one that surprises me is Solomon. If there was anybody that should not have an identity crisis, to me, it should have been Solomon. When you think about who he was and what he had, he is the wisest person on earth. Okay, how do you not know who you are if you're the wisest person on earth? It's like the Tootsie Pop commercial with the owl. Apparently there's this owl in a tree somewhere that happens to know how many licks it takes to get to the end of a Tootsie Pop. I never quite understood that commercial, but he's this wise old owl. And you have Solomon, who's the wisest person on earth. And yet, what's his biggest question that he's trying to answer all through the 12 chapters of Ecclesiastes? What is the point of life? It's like, Solomon, that's what we're trying to ask you. That's what you're supposed to tell us as the wisest man on earth. How do you not know the answer to this question? And then when he starts off his lesson in Ecclesiastes, it's like, vanity of vanity. It's all vanity. There's no point, there's no purpose. And it's like, okay, great. The wisest man on earth is now telling me that there is absolutely no point to this life. He was going through a crisis. Who am I? What's the point? What's the purpose? And all throughout the book, he throws you a little bit, I guess, a teaser of what he's found along his journey. And he goes through some very crazy experiments because he's very wealthy. And again, you think, how does the wisest person on earth, the most wealthy person on earth, not know who he is and what the point of life really is? But he goes on this long journey. And along the way, he builds a bunch of things. And he doesn't just get a bunch of people to build things for him. He gets his hands dirty, and he picks up a hammer, or he picks up an axe, and he gets to work, and he starts building his own houses and his own cities. And you've heard about the hanging gardens of Babylon. I mean, like, he goes all out, And he says, I don't know what the purpose of life is, but there is value to work. There's value to hard work. But at the end of the day, it's all vanity. And then he even starts saying things like, what's the point of everything that I've built, of everything that I've accumulated and everything that I have? Because in the end, I'm just going to give it to somebody else, and then who knows what they're going to do with all of my stuff. And we see following Solomon, he gives that kingdom over to his son, and his son begins to wreck the entire kingdom and throw away everything that Solomon has built. And you look at it and go, that is so stinking depressing. But the whole point of his book, I'm sure you know, is what? Everything is vanity. Everything is pointless unless you have God. When you look at the great experiment that Solomon put on, and then you look at the crisis that you're facing in your life, the answer is exactly the same. I'm not going to tell you anything this morning that is so profound and that's just going to unlock the secret for you. But what I hope to do this morning is to remind you, as a Christian, the power source that you have, and to remind you how big God is, and to remind you how relatively small your crisis is. Now, you might be sitting there and going, Dale, I know for a fact that the crisis that I'm going through in my life is so much more than anything you've ever gone through in your life. And you might be right. But when you look at the individuals that are facing crisis in their life, no matter what age they are, no matter where they're from, it is the biggest deal to them. You go and talk to a little kid. I don't see Camden. But, class, right. He's fine. But you talk to a little kid, and maybe they're crying. And you go up to them and you say, what's wrong? What is it? And they're going through this major crisis, and they're like, we're out of goldfish. I don't know how in the world I'm going to make it through this sermon. I don't know how I'm going to make it through this lesson. We're out of goldfish. We don't have any more goldfish. And you can sit back and go, oh, you poor little child. You think that's a problem. Wait till you get older. Wait till you get older and your back is hurting so bad you can't sleep a wink that night. And then now you have to stay awake in the sermon. And then now you might actually get called out by the preacher. That is way bigger problem than your goldfish. And you think about anybody else that comes up and talks to you, and you can compare, and we do all the time. We think, well, if I had that problem, I'd be fine. I wouldn't be breaking down and collapsing like this person over here that doesn't, I'm not pointing at anybody in specific. I try to point to that gap of people right there. If I just had that person's problem, then I would be totally fine. I would never be crying like a baby if I was just going through that person's crisis. Or it's the other way around. If I have health issues. If I just had financial problems, then I would be fine because I would be just so grateful that I have the health that I do. But I want to point to a verse that we're going to come back to in a little bit. It's a verse that I go back to very often, and it's very simple, and it's one that I think that you are very familiar with, and that's 1 Peter 5:7. 1 Peter 5:7. I know you probably know what this verse says, but I want you to go ahead and open it up and look at it. 1 Peter 5:7. Casting all your cares on him, for he cares for you. That is a very personal verse, isn't it? Casting all your cares, or your version might say anxieties, on him, for he cares for you. One of the strangest things, before this outbreak got incredibly random and strange, and to the point they're not even letting people go into the hospital. I just wanted to go in and have coffee with Janelle a few weeks back, and they wouldn't even let me do that. I'm like, I have an in here because my wife works here, so technically I'm a step underneath a doctor, so I should be able to go and have coffee. But they wouldn't even let me pass the lobby, and I'm like, what is this? But I remember going to the ICU before it got really, really bad, and they weren't taking anybody back there unless their problems, were like visual. You could see them. It's like they had to have this little chart that says, okay, how much blood is dripping on the floor, and how do they look? Are they fainting? Are they passed out? Are they breathing? Are they alive? Oh, well, if they're still slightly alive, then they don't get to go back. We have other people that need to go back first before them. And there's like this line of if your problems are really, really, really bad, like they look really bad, then you can go back. But if you are having a really bad day and you're really hurting, but you still look somewhat okay, you're not going to the back. And they have like this little way of determining who gets to go back or not. God doesn't work that way. When you look at 1 Peter 5:7, it says, cast all your anxieties on him, for he cares for you as a person. God doesn't have this way of, weeding through the prayers that come up and they say, okay, this person right here is hurting more than maybe Jeff. Or this person's hurting more than maybe Billy. And so I'm going to get to their prayers first, and because there are so many prayers coming up to me right now, I'm going to have to put a lot of these on hold. Have you ever felt a little bit timid in your prayer life before? Almost like you're just embarrassed to bring before God what's really on your heart, because maybe you think there are so many other prayers that God needs to hear besides mine. Because what I'm going through is just not really a big deal. I'll admit, I've prayed for my dog before. Not because my dog was going through this rough time, because I love my dog. And so I'll say a prayer like, help my dog to live for a long time, because I love my dog. And help my dog to be healthy and not run away or not get hit by a car. I remember afterwards, I just felt sheepish because I was like, is that dumb? Was that a waste of a prayer? You know, was there an angel in heaven like looking down thinking like, really? Like, have you seen the starving people in Africa and you're going to bring your dog before the throne? 1 Peter 5:7, if it's an anxiety, if it's something that is on your heart or worrying you, cast it before God. Give it to God because he cares for you. In fact, God cares for you more than you care for you. And if there's anything that we know about human nature is that we like ourselves and we want to take care of ourselves and we want to be comfortable and we want to be okay. God cares more about you than you care about you. God cares more about the things that you care about, your family, your loved ones, the people in your life, more than you do. And how do I know that? Because God sent his only son to die for all of those people in your life that maybe worry you. And God sent his son to die for you. This morning, very quickly, I want to give you just 6 reminders. 6 reminders to help you in whatever personal crisis you're going through right now. The first reminder is this: God is on his throne. I want to thank Paul for reading Habakkuk 2:20. It's one of my favorite verses in the Old Testament. God's on his throne. And if God is on his throne, then everything is going to be all right. No, that doesn't mean that we're not going to go through some pretty difficult times, or we're going to, maybe this pandemic just never ends and things get even worse after this hurricane. You know, there's a giant dinosaur comes through and tramples down all the cities or something. Who knows? It's 2020. You just kind of have to go with the flow at this point. But God is on his throne, which means God is still in control. And if you're a faithful Christian, that means your retirement, the end for you, is incredibly beautiful and incredibly wonderful. God is on his throne. Habakkuk 2:20 says, let all the earth keep silent. If that's not one of those verses that just brings you peace, I don't know what verse will. Let all the earth keep silent. It's like when the storms around Jesus were raging and the waves were so big, what did Jesus say? Peace, be still. And what did the storm do? It calmed and it quieted itself. It was silent before God. Noise is a good word to describe everything that's going on. Turn on the news, noise. Watch the debate, I couldn't even do it. Noise. Janelle watched it a little bit, and I was like, how was it? And she was like, oh, man, your blood pressure just goes through the roof, and your anxiety just goes through the roof, just listening to these two people just bickering with one another and acting absolutely crazy. And you read a verse like that, let all the earth just keep silent. That's what it feels like sometimes. Living in this world, it feels like all of these things that are happening, it's just so noisy, and you just want it to quiet down for a little bit so that you can back up, so that you can breathe, so that you can get your blood pressure back down, so that you can calm down a little bit. God is still on his throne. No matter what crisis you're facing in your life, maybe you needed that reminder this morning, God is on his throne. And he has the power that all the earth, his creation, keep silent. Be silent before God. God can bring that kind of peace in your life. And another one that's not on here, another tip maybe, is just don't watch the news. I mean, some of you need to watch the news because you are my news. I've told you this before. I hear things for the first time because of you. I mean, we're in the foyer, we're talking, and someone's like, "Do you hear about the hurricane that's coming?" I'm like, "No. Thanks for telling me." So a few of you watch it, but for the most part, just stop watching it. I mean, it really helps a lot. Number 2, though, some things aren't up to me. This is one of those tips that I almost didn't put down, and reminders that I almost didn't put down because, well, you probably already know it, and it might give you more anxiety than help you a little bit. But some things are not up to you. We don't control the world. We don't control the world around us. That's one of those things that I've tried to keep in my mind when things start to stress me out a little bit. When you start thinking about, well, who's our next president going to be, and what's going to happen. So if I don't control that, though, if I'm not in that, I'm not a political figure of any kind, I'm not running for anything, then why do I have to take on the burden of that? Just let it go. We're not in control. And here's what I would like to say is maybe we don't really want that control. We don't want the control, I think, that maybe we claim that we do. We wish that we had control over certain things, but I don't think so. What peace do you have because you know that the God that is on his throne is in control of everything? People are not perfect. People make mistakes all the time. We pass wrecks, and especially it seems like Lacey Springs is just like a magnet for car wrecks. But I've seen so many car wrecks on the street that we live on. So many wrecks. And you think, okay, how many people that were driving on their way home or down that road thought, I'm going to get in a wreck when I go down this road? No, those drivers were probably a whole lot like me and were like, I'm invincible and I'll never get in a wreck. Sorry, Janelle. But it happens. You can have 2 hands tight on the steering wheel. You can be buckled up. You can be going the speed limit and you can still get in a wreck. You can be doing all the things in your life right, so it seems. And crisis can still happen. Bad things can still happen. But what comfort it is knowing that God is in control. He's in the ultimate control, and that your power of prayer has more power than the seatbelt in your car. No, I'm not saying you shouldn't buckle up, but I'm saying the power of prayer is way more powerful than locking your door at night. God is in control. Number 3. This is probably going to have a ring in your ear from maybe your childhood, but it's character building. Crisis or character building. No cringe. All right. I always hated hearing my dad say that growing up. It's like, just shovel all the gravel onto the driveway. Your back's hurting, and he's like, it's character building. One day you're going to look back and thank me for making you shovel all of this gravel, or shovel all the snow, or rake all the leaves, or mow the lawn with a push mower. Not the kind that have the little engine on them still, so you just turn it on and you just kind of guide the push mower. Now, like an actual push mower. And now I'm looking out and seeing that there might be a few people here that actually were around when you had to mow the lawn with just clippers or something. You win, but still, there are things you probably heard growing up. It's character building. It's good for you to go through something hard or to do something hard. Well, you know, it's actually a biblical principle. When we go through trials, it makes us better people. No, God's not the one that, per se, put every terrible thing inside your life. In fact, another verse I have down is Job 13 and verse 15, where Job says something incredibly amazing. In Job chapter 13, Job is going through some very terrible things in his life, and he's got everything stripped away from him, and yet he says something so profound. If he slays me, he thinks it's God, if God were to slay me, yet will I trust in him. There are sometimes when Christians, faithful Christians, go through a crisis that either builds them up or breaks them down, and when it breaks them down, you think, how could you were a faithful Christian? You were a faithful child of God. Like, don't you know that there are verses in the Bible, like in the book of James, that say in first chapter of James, where he basically opens up, count it all joy, my brethren, when you go through various trials. How is it that this trial broke you, or this crisis broke you? And yet it does. But Job says, even if this is God, even if it is God. And we know the big picture and what was going on behind the curtain with Satan and all of that, but Job didn't. He said, even if God were to slay me, yet will I trust in him. It's character building. That one is so hard to say because sometimes it's like, well, maybe I don't want my character to be built. Maybe I'm fine with how my character is now. I'm good with just having this amount of character for the rest of my life if it means I don't have to go through crisis. But another verse we have to look at too is 2 Timothy 3:16 and 17, which is a verse that probably many of you already know. But it says the word of God, it's profitable for doctrine. We're like, yes, it is. The word of God, it's profitable for doctrine, teaches you how to worship, teaches you how to live your life. That's all that stuff is true. It's profitable for doctrine, for proof, or for reproof, for correction, for instruction. Why? Last part of that verse, so that the man or woman of God may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing. It's character building. The correction, the reproof, the training in righteousness for the man of God. I want to be a man of God, but when you look at a verse like that, maybe it makes you hesitate a little bit. Perfect. The word perfect there means to be usable. It doesn't mean perfection. You're going to go through this crisis or this trial in your life. You're going to come out the other side squeaky clean. Not a single problem in the entire world. You are absolutely perfect as a human being. That word there means perfect or usable. You're going to be usable. Like that trusty, rusty, old screwdriver you got in your toolbox. It may not be shiny like the flat tip you have, but it's that Phillips tip that you actually need, even though it doesn't look as pretty as that other shiny tool that you have. Usable, perfect, complete, lacking in nothing. That's what that correction, that reproof, that instruction is for. Crisis builds your character. Reminder number 4, though, be concerned about what you're concerned about. Sometimes we work ourselves up and we're so concerned about something that we really shouldn't be that concerned about. I believe that crisis sometimes can be God's way of making you refocus on the things that matter. I know I said this sermon wasn't about COVID-19, but it is an illustration staring me in the face right now as all of you are wearing masks and looking at me. But think about the things that the church has learned since COVID-19. Think about there are things that we knew in our heads, but things that maybe we didn't practice or actually really, really know. You know, the two words for knowing in the Bible, you have gnosko, which is like this knowledge of you know it and you've also experienced it. And then there's this other knowledge where it's just like you know it, but you don't really have any life experience with it. But I think about the lessons that we have, as the church, have learned since this outbreak. First one is that you don't need a building to worship God. You don't need a church building. We've had to come up with so many different ways to worship. I worshiped with the Hebrew Church of Christ in Grant. We were all in a parking lot, in our cars. It's like, that's not scriptural. I don't know about that. We're like, well, the church is not a building. The church are the people. And there are so many lessons that we've learned because of a crisis. And while there are so many terrible things that have happened because of this pandemic, it has also helped us to realize, what we should actually be concerned about. We should be more concerned about spiritual things. Because this COVID is dangerous, and it's dangerous for a lot of people. And you have especially some older people or people with compromised immune systems that get it and then they pass away. And it makes you think about the afterlife more. And it makes you think about what's to come a whole lot more. What should I really be concerned about? My job? Should I be more concerned about the car that may not get us back to Lacey? What things should I really, really be concerned about? Maybe I should be concerned about my eternal state, where I'm going to spend the rest of eternity. Thanks, COVID. Character building. We need to be concerned about what we're concerned about. Priorities. Priorities. Check our priorities. Number 5, crisis brings correction. Very similar to the other ones, but this helps us kind of look at ourselves more, going through our own personal crisis. How do you respond to a crisis? Now, I'm so glad my entire life has not been on film, because there have been times when I have been faced with a crisis and the reaction has been so embarrassing. Like, man, that you are a child. You need to get it together. You should not respond to something at your age like this. But I think about when, I was younger and I'm walking through the house at night and I stub my toe on a table that's not alive. And I get so angry at an object that's not alive. And it's like, hey, it's not the table's fault. It's your fault for walking into it. The table didn't move there. You probably put it there, and you ran into it. But crises they help you look at yourself. How did I respond? Okay, does that mean I need to work on maybe patience? Does that mean I need to work on maybe not having some anger issues? Or maybe that means I need to work on my endurance. It took me maybe 2 days going through this crisis to now look at it and then feel like my whole entire world is collapsing. 2 days. And then when that crisis is finally over, have you ever looked back and gone, that wasn't so bad? But in the moment, your entire world is collapsing. Crisis helps brings correction, helps you look at the things that maybe you need to work on in your life. Number 6, though, and most importantly, God cares about your crisis. About yours. If there's something that you're going through this morning, God cares about it more than we do. One moment I don't think I'll probably ever forget in my entire life was when I went to Cambodia. There's an orphanage there called Hannah's Hope Orphanage. And there was this kid. I had nothing in common with him, but we didn't speak the same language. He spoke Khmer, I spoke English, and I could speak maybe 5 words of Khmer, not nearly enough to communicate with him, and I probably butchered every pronunciation of those words. But we played together every day, played volleyball in the front yard. We made paper airplanes. We hung out for this entire 2-week period that I was there. Every time I went to the village, this little kid was there, and he had a glass eye, and he was almost to the age where he was no longer going to be able to stay at Hannah's Hope. He was going to be let loose. And I remember towards the end of that trip, the kid started crying, and I thought, man, he's going to miss me a lot. I'm going to miss him too. And it was touching, and I was already on the verge of, breaking down. But my translator was there. His name's Panat. And he said he just thought that you were going to adopt him and you were going to be his dad. And man, if I was on the verge of tears then, it cut and it hurt so bad thinking about this kid. And then on the whole flight back, I'm thinking about him, being like, what were his thoughts? Was he thinking, is it because I was too old? Because I'm about to leave the orphanage. Most people, when they're adopting a child, they want someone younger. Is it because I'm too old? Or is he thinking, is it because I have a weird glass eye? Is it that scar from however he got that from his past? I'm guessing not very good. Is that what was keeping him from adopting me or taking me home with him? And if I could speak the language, or if I could go back, I would say things like, no, it's not your age. No, it's not the glass eye. It's because I am 16 years old and I'm not old enough to adopt you. You think about that in terms of your relationship with God. And it's the complete opposite. I wanted to take that kid home because I'm thinking, okay, my house actually has AC. My house actually has hot water. Where I grow up, you have your life rate and how long you're on this earth is a lot longer because we have great medical benefits in America. I wanted to take that kid. But sometimes it's the complete opposite with our relationship with God. Like God is the one saying all those things. And he's not looking down at you and saying, I don't want you because of whatever scars you have in your life, or because you're too old and you spent your entire life not serving me, and now that the age that you're at right now, I have no use for you in my kingdom. God's not saying that. But I believe that God is having similar thoughts and saying, I want you to be where I am because where I am is a whole lot better than where you are. No, we're not talking first world and third world, but he is saying, where I am, there are no more crises. There is no more pain. You live forever. You have a new body. Everything that is going on in your life that is bad is not going to be there if you come to where we are. But sometimes we're not like the kid. It's not that we have a problem with that. It's that we don't want to do that. We don't want God to be our Father. Because if God's our Father, that means we have to follow this book right here. And that's when you read those verses like there's instruction, there's reproof, there's correction, and those things are very difficult. I hope that this lesson today was more of a reminder that no matter what crisis you're going through, God has got the guidance to help you through it. I don't have to know every single thing that's going on in your life to know that God has all of the answers and all of the help that you need. It has nothing to do with COVID. These are personal things. Now, the most important crisis that you should take care of in your life this morning is obviously the one that you may have if it's a spiritual nature. If there is a spiritual crisis that you're facing that is keeping you from God, take care of that this morning. Because I guarantee that maybe you don't see it this way, but it is the biggest crisis you have right now. And it's also the one that can solve all the other problems that you have as well. Because no matter what happens in this life, if your spiritual life is right with God, you know where you're going. And you know what's going to happen after this life is over. If there's anything that we can help you with as a congregation, prayer of a righteous man availeth much, conquers much, can help more than anything, then let us do that for you. It doesn't matter how big the crisis is or how small the crisis is. If God cares, then we should care about it too. If there's something that we can help you with, pray for you as a congregation, try and encourage you, throw an arm around you, then let us do that for you. Let God help you through us this morning as together we stand and as we sing.